Let's see how fast this video gets demonetized. Over the last couple of weeks, I've heard rumblings of a new conspiracy, and I'm always fascinated by any ravings of the terminally online who have convinced themselves there's a secret cabal of powerful, hooded figures manipulating society. For what purpose and how? They'll never tell. However, of all the conspiracies that are out there, this one maybe is the most plausible considering the current socio-political environment we find ourselves in. The Gooner to alt-right pipeline. You might be asking yourself, what the hell is a Gooner? So let me, a 38-year-old millennial, explain what gooning is. The term has picked up traction in the last couple of years, but according to Know Your Meme, a very reliable source of internet history, the first Urban Dictionary definition was submitted all the way back in 2005, the year I graduated high school. What am I doing with my life? Gooning, the act of a very addicted or chronic masturbator, getting so into masturbating, or jacking off, jacking off for the layman out there who's masturbating. I jack off. Getting so into masturbating or jacking off that the dude becomes a total goon, becomes stupid on his own can think of nothing else but busting a nut. Despite the succinct definition, there seems to be some contention about how much cranking down one must partake in to be considered a gooner, and what is and isn't gooner content. Some people say you have to treat it like a sport in order to be a true gooner, rubbing one out for hours before climaxing and watching multiple adult videos at the same time. Competitive beat-off sessions where you're the only contestant. But really, aren't we all competing in that competition every time we hog-tie the swine? There's also some confusion among Arsenal soccer fans, as that's what they're often referred to as the team's nickname is the Gunners. So they're Gooners. Collateral damage of depraved internet trends, everybody. I'm just a soccer fan. I don't like to jerk off like that.
I think there's a gooning conspiracy going on in this country. Let me be as clear and concise as possible. All of the right-wing controlled apps, Instagram and X, push gooning content so heavily. It doesn't matter what you use Instagram for, your Discover page is full of BBLs. This is how the pipeline begins. Because you get no bitches, you look up how to get bitches. There's a direct pipeline from gooning to conservative podcasts to the Fourth Reich.
In a nutshell, the conspiracy suggests that the proliferation of this subset of gooner content is intentionally being pushed by all ages platforms to create more right-wing young men. The logic goes that constant exposure to porn and other sexually suggestive content, especially when it's just out of reach, fuels resentment, making men more susceptible to manosphere rhetoric. And since gooning falls under the larger umbrella of the manosphere, people assume this content is feeding directly into the more extreme, incel-adjacent side of it, the Nick Fuentes 4chan crowd rather than the Joe Rogan alpha types who don't need porn because they're drowning in real pussy. But at this point, a lot of gooner culture feels more like an inside joke, with people sharing emergency goon kits and hyping each other up on r/gooned, which seems more like ironic shitposting than serious ideological grooming. But I digress. Now, before I move on, there's a lot to be said about 18+ content, from its evolution from being a dirty little secret to being used as a marketing tool in mainstream media to sell us cheeseburgers, and its normalization in certain contexts while being completely unacceptable and demonized in others simultaneously. To me, there's nothing wrong with consuming a good porno from time to time or the existence of sex work. Everything in moderation. The bigger issue with adult content is the mixed messages we receive about it and the lack of good faith education about what healthy adult content consumption looks like. It's often weaponized to push some moral war where there's an overcorrection by some who suggest it leads to antisocial behavior and a sociopathic porn addiction or even murder and death. On the other side, there are those who minimize all the valid negative aspects of the adult industry in consuming too much porn. Sex trafficking, abuse, and coercion of performers, as well as the likelihood that the consumer may become an isolated incel fascist who sees women as nothing more than a pleasure-giving object, a walking fleshlight. There are genuine issues that exist. I don't want to downplay that, but we all have sex and jerk it, and porno and sex work are some of the oldest and most lucrative industries for a reason. We're sexual beings with animalistic urges, and we can't deny that. To do so would be to deny that we are human and alive. But are these algorithms and platforms intentionally pushing more Gooner content on purpose? Now that Instagram and TikTok and Twitter are run by born-again alpha males who think we need more masculine energy, or CEOs who censor their platforms to stay in the good graces of the American government, or actual fascists with a breeder fetish, respectively, Occam's razor tells us, yes, of course they're prioritizing Gooner content to warp the soft brains of their users. There's something almost more nefarious with the prevalence of softcore porno on public platforms as opposed to just going straight to the source of on-demand full frontal. This kind of content, for example, isn't exactly not safe for work, but it's also not safe for work. It exists on a platform that everyone uses, and if you're caught watching it, there's plausible deniability that it was just the algorithm and not something you consciously sought out. Part of its appeal is that it's exciting seeing something somewhere you're not supposed to see it. It's the normalization of the taboo that has a built-in defense mechanism if you ever cross that line, which, ironically, makes it more tempting to push that boundary with every subsequent time you come across it. But to what end? Those who believe the conspiracy to be true argue that manipulating your entire user base into being more comfortable in objectifying women in a fantasy setting, whether implicit or explicit, has a direct correlation to objectifying women in the real world. This ideology is misogynistic in nature, that men deserve or have a right to own women and do with them as they please. It's the slippery slope argument that could lead to more right-wing or conservative thought, making them more susceptible to accept even more radical, heteronormative, misogynistic, and even racist ideas about women, sex, and sexuality. Are some people more susceptible to this kind of alt-right radicalization via Gooner content? Sure. Is it a nationwide epidemic that's rotting men's brains? As with most conspiracies, this one exists because it provides a simple answer to a complicated issue. It would be great to be able to definitively say Gooner content is everywhere because Zuckerberg wants his male users to fall for the right-wing worldview he has endorsed that is now taking over the country, and women keep making it because it makes them money and in turn makes money for Meta. All I'm saying is that it might be a little more complicated, and I would simply argue with algorithms being as good as they are, feeding us more of the same content that we interact with on a regular basis, that there's probably some confirmation bias going on here as well. Some algorithms are arguably better at this than others, particularly TikTok. Only once every couple of months will my TikTok For You page try to feed me some thirst trap or borderline Gooner content. It's come to the conclusion that all I want to see are videos of current events and Marxist theory and occasionally some surrealist anti-comedy content.
They have these like fucking random Breitbart guys who are like, Mr. President, I have it on good authority that your dick is long and fat. Mr. President, can you tell me how hard you can blow out my fucking back walls, dude? I'm with the Nelk boys.
Instagram is kind of a different story and feels like their algorithm might just be broken. Or the Explore page doesn't know what I want because I barely interact with it, or the main feed. I look at stories because at least those are in chronological order, Instagram. What are we doing? Fix everything about your platform. So when I heard about this conspiracy and that it seemed to be more of an Instagram thing, I did some research into what Instagram's FYP equivalent would serve me. When I was first contemplating doing this video, I was scrolling down the main feed one night when I came upon one of those suggested Reels carousels, and it was full of Gooner content. Video after video of women jumping up and down braless, or bent over with their phone pointing right down their shirt, or making a jerk-off motion off camera only to reveal they were just shaking a blender bottle. Unfortunately, I don't have a screen recording of it because at the time, I didn't think it was real and wasn't prepared for it. After closing the app, I thought, well, that's solved. Conspiracy is real. No, I actually kicked myself and realized I needed to conduct an experiment to try and capture what I had just come across. So a couple days later, I tried getting the results to repeat themselves. It wasn't as overt this time. A Twitch clip, a scene from Smile 2, the set of a Star Trek show, I think, then Pokimane, Donald Trump, and an interview with Mackenzie Davis where the only kind of Gooner thing was the skirt she's wearing. Men go crazy for floral sundresses, we all know that. So it was not solved, and my first test was a failure. I was pretty convinced this was all a hoax, and what I had seen the night before was just a fluke. For the first time in, I don't know, maybe years, I checked my Explore page for more data. For science. Okay, a bit more goonery. Twitch boobs, gym boobs, a montage of Brie Larson's boobs, white tank top boobs, no tank top boobs, but it's not wall-to-wall tit. There's people's art, David Lynch, SNL clips, Sims Shrew memes, political content. I still wasn't sure if this proved anything. I needed help, and I enlisted 3 friends to send me what their Explore pages looked like, but first, I needed a control, so I created an alt account. If the conspiracy was true, then this new account would be full of Gooner content from the jump. If it wasn't true, it would be a complete shit show of random photos and videos. Which is exactly what it was. Art, crafts, arts and crafts, etc. Further strengthening the case against the conspiracy's validity. What about my 3 test subjects' Explore pages, though? Of the 3 friends, each uses Instagram at 3 separate increments of frequency. Subject A, so little, he might as well not even have Instagram. Subject B, a middling amount. And Subject C, very frequently, based on how often he shares Reels with me. It's quite a lot. You know who you are. Subject A's Explore page was curated a bit to his interest despite such little interaction. Guitars, video game memes, and AI slop, which was a constant for all the participants and not just him. A whole separate problem on Instagram, but pretty much a 0 on the goon scale. Subject B's Explore page was about as bad as my own. Women falling out of their bathing suits and celebrity boob fan cams mixed with cute animals, food, and the occasional obligatory Zuckerberg podcast clip. No emerging trend yet. Finally, Subject C. His Explore page was where things took a turn. Now, for context, this friend did say he used to get a lot of skate videos and cute animal content, but since going through a recent breakup, he did start watching relationship content and his algorithm did change, potentially tainting the sample. And yeah, this is quite the change. But all it proves is that watching a certain kind of content will yield different results in the algorithm. It is kind of bizarre that the algorithm saw him watching people talk about relationships and thought, this guy's really sad. Let's flood his feed with some big mommy milkers instead of just more relationship advice or cute animal videos. Maybe it was just being like a good wingman and not so subtly encouraging him to move on by going out there and playing the field. You really gotta stop watching this sad sack breakup content and go out there and get laid, man. What are you doing? While it is true that certain algorithms are biased based on the individuals who code them and the culture and priorities of the company implementing them, at the end of the day, it seems to me this Gooner conspiracy is just that. I went into this really hoping that there would be more causation rather than what seems like just correlation. And how do you really measure what a normal amount of goon is in the algorithm? I mean, my 3rd friend told me, I don't know how to get off this ride in regards to the amount of cleavage he's getting, so we know what the maximum is. But can we really call it a conspiracy when other people's Explore page only has 1 or 2 videos of women whose bathing suit bottoms accidentally pop open just off camera? I don't think so. Obviously, this was a deeply flawed experiment. If we wanted to properly test whether suggestive content is being pushed intentionally as part of some radicalization pipeline, we'd need a real controlled study. And also maybe access to Instagram's algorithm itself. Algorithm, put a couple of extra THs in there. That means setting up fresh accounts, isolating variables like watch time, interaction, and device browser history to rule out external factors. Ideally, we'd have multiple test groups engaging with different types of content, with some only watching fitness influencers and others engaging with outright adult content, and some deliberately avoiding anything suggestive altogether to see how the algorithm responds. If at all. The conspiracy relies on anecdotes from people who probably hovered a little too long on a video of a woman getting her white tank top wet and are now stuck in an engagement loop. At the end of the day, Instagram's algorithm doesn't even seem that good compared to something like TikTok. Their algorithm, for all its faults, is at least accurate at serving hyper-specific content that actually aligns with your interests, never mind the echo chamber it creates. Instagram, on the other hand, only throws some stuff you're interested in at you, and then a lot of other garbage that other people are engaging with. The fact that I never interact with Gooner content on Instagram at all, yet it still appears on my Explore page, suggests that it isn't a carefully curated radicalization pipeline, but just a clunky, outdated algorithm at best that assumes every user is a goon to some degree. And I genuinely think people are accidentally telling on themselves in noticing this pattern of perceived increase in Gooner content when hypothesizing some grand conspiracy and sharing it with the whole of the internet. I'm sure I will even be accused of being a Gooner by sharing my Explore page on YouTube. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. I watch normal porn like a real man. And honestly, who really cares if people watch this kind of content casually? All the hand-wringing and pearl-clutching and worry is directed at the wrong thing. The real problem is capitalism. The commodification of bodies, women's bodies in this case, has created a horny snake eating its own tail. Men want to yank it, and women can monetize that urge. And don't get it twisted. I'm not placing blame on women here because it is a feedback loop of sex and capital, and neither party is fully to blame or in the wrong for participating in that cycle. Every couple of years, Gooner content evolves, becoming more risque than the previous iteration. In the 1800s, there was a lot of sexual repression, and seeing a woman's ankles in public would either get them stoned to death or cause men to go into a Looney Tunes frenzy. Or both, in which case I assume Victorian men just exploded on the sidewalk from the internal conflict they experienced. I want to have sex with her, but I hate that she has agency! Ow! As time passed and brothels fell out of fashion or were outlawed, we got gentlemen's clubs, then strip clubs, then escorts. Pornographic magazines went from cartoons passed around a speakeasy to well-regarded editorials that made millions of dollars. The internet made it easier than ever to consume adult content, and for free no less. But the more explicit content we consumed, the less satiated we became. There's no mystique or curiosity when you can see everything, which is why I think this kind of softcore Gooner content you see on Instagram is so pervasive, even if it's not as pervasive as the conspiracy suggests. And besides, this softcore only suggestive content is nothing new. As a teenager in the 2000s, I was constantly bombarded by Girls Gone Wild videos and Maxim magazines and Carl's Jr. ads that were all basically on par with this Instagram Gooner content. Not to mention much worse shit thanks to the early internet. Cake farts, goatsy, Mr. Hands. The difference now is that the internet has become more centralized and corporatized, so there's a bigger moral panic about content that was always there. And look, I think it's great that younger generations are more wary, suspicious even, of the content they consume and the companies who control that content. I mean, being mad about sex scenes in movies, chill the fuck out, but I think you can be too suspicious, and calling this a conspiracy is maybe a little much. The reality is Instagram's algorithm just isn't that great. If this were some kind of intentional radicalization effort, we'd see a clearer, more predictable path rather than an algorithm that seems to just throw half-baked assumptions at users. I mean, it still shows people making 2010's curated millennial coffee content, and I've never interacted with that stuff either. Plus, in some cases, I worry that calling women doing what they will with their bodies online a conspiracy can come across as reactionary and doesn't take into account that some women who create this content might see it as liberating or even art. I mean, not this stuff that I showed you, which is pretty cynical, but the broader trend. If we start drawing lines between suggestive content and far-right radicalization, we ignore the fact that the real issue isn't women at all. It's a system that monetizes and exploits sex while dictating how it should be consumed. Calling this a conspiracy and talking about how women's bodies somehow leads to fascism, or at the very least a conservative ideology that wants to control women's bodies in the first place, rests on the assumption that men can't control themselves and it's women's fault actually for giving them a boner. How is that different from victimizing women for merely existing? How does that help destigmatize sex and not make you sound like one of those old weirdos who says women who are sexually assaulted or abused were asking for it because they were wearing a short skirt? Men, just like women, have agency over their actions. If seeing a bunch of titties turns you into a Proud Boy, then you were probably a neo-Nazi long before you were a Gooner. That's the video. Thanks so much for sticking around. If you made it this far, wow, you truly are special. I appreciate everybody for following and subscribing. Make sure you follow the rules of the channel and like and share and subscribe so that you can be called a special Gooner. A special Gooner. What am I even saying anymore? Hey man, you guys literally asked for this. I put a poll up on Instagram and asked if you wanted me to talk about this or the male living subreddit, and you by a landslide picked this. So don't be mad at me. Speaking of which, you can go follow me on Instagram. I would really appreciate it. I give updates. I do polls about content that you guys want to see. And sometimes I'm really bad about it, posting behind the scenes photos, which is really just photos of this garage. So go do that if you feel like it. And you're trying to get off of Gooner Instagram. Watch some of my content. I guess maybe that won't help. You might start to see more Gooner content if you follow me. Thanks so much again for sticking around. Until next time, vanish. I'm gonna bust!